Andy Golding, I am live from the Kripke trading floor. I am lucky enough to be speaking today with Jason Miller. Jason is an associate professor with tenure at Michigan State University. He is with the Eli Broad College of Business, and Jason's specialty is supply chain management. Jason, welcome and thank you for doing this today.
Thank you for having me on, Andy.
And Jason, can you give a little bit of an explanation, a little bit more of an explanation about what you teach and being at Michigan State?
Yep. So I teach our capstone case-based course to the graduating seniors, and my research area of expertise is the transportation sector, in particular the full truckload sector.
Well, then I guess I'm speaking to the right person. Are there a lot of professors around the country that speak to this, and how did you end up making this your specialty?
So around the country, there aren't too many. Chris Kaplis at MIT is one individual. Alex Scott at Michigan State is another academic who really specializes in this sector. But there really aren't too many of us. I got into it. My dad was a driver in the 80s and then worked for International as a sales engineer in the 90s and 2000s. And my grandfather was an engineer for International back in the 50s, 60s through the late 80s. So I've grown up around trucking.
That's great. So today I just want to give a high-level overview to a number of people in the scrap metal business. As you and I spoke in our pre-interview, our industry is very heavily reliant on the trucking industry, and there's a lot of questions out there with regard to trucking. Is trucking are they going to be available? Is the price going to go through the moon? Can you give me a little bit of an overview of how you see things in the next 30 days and maybe some historical perspective as well?
Okay, so I'd say right now, especially in the dry van sector, what we're seeing in this March is an unprecedented time with regard to the spike in outbound shipments that are occurring. And the biggest reason for that is the need to restock your Walmart, your Costco's, your Targets with product. Freight Waves, which has some of the most reliable data on shipment volumes. For example, right now we're seeing our numbers in March are about 30% higher than they were in 2019. And given that it takes trucking companies 6 to 9 months to add capacity, what that means is essentially we have a fixed supply to deal with 30% more demand. Now, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has suspended hour of service rules for any shipments that are COVID-19 related. So if you were hauling a load of ventilators to a hospital, you are exempt. Hour of service rules do not apply to you. Same way if you're hauling, let's say, a shipment of food from Kraft to a Walmart distribution center, you're equally not obliged to abide by HOS rules. So what that's going to mean is that we are going to see some increase in supply because the hour of service rules don't apply. But what I would say is expect, especially for spot market shipments, we are going to see temporarily higher prices in the dry van sector, just because with this increase in shipment volume in the retail space and in the food space and medical space, a lot of carriers are rejecting some of that freight which is being offered on contract rates. The reason for that is because this increase in shipments is very hard for carriers to handle, because when a carrier sets up their network, they plan on roughly 15 shipments a week from point A to point B, and then 15 shipments a week from point B to other areas in the country. The challenge is let's say that 15 shipments from A to B is now 40. Well, the problem is that means I've got, 25 trucks who may not have outbound loads from point B. I have to run them empty in order to get additional freight. That just increases my cost. And so essentially the dynamic that's occurring right now is spike in outbound shipments for dry van. That leads to more freight rejection. That leads to more freight on the spot market, which is going to lead to higher prices, at least over probably the next 30-day period.
Can you explain a little bit about what freight rejection is? Because in our industry, freight rejection means a load gets somewhere, it's not what the consumer wanted, and they reject it. What do you mean by freight rejection?
So freight rejection in this context means that a shipper, so let's say a Procter & Gamble, offers a shipment, let's say to a Walmart distribution center, to the primary carrier that has the contract on that specific shipment lane. So let's say it's J.B. Hunt. Freight rejection means is when that shipment is offered to J.B. Hunt, they turn it down and say, no, we are not hauling that. At that point, what happens is the shipper needs to cycle to the next carrier with which they have a contract for on that lane. So let's say that's Knight Swift. If Knight Swift says they'll haul it, then that situation's done. But let's say Knight Swift also rejects it. At that point, if you don't have another carrier to haul that load on that lane, you have to then move to the spot market. So you may call up a broker, you may go to a load board like DAT or truckstop.com, and then you will essentially post your load, and then a bid takes place and the lowest cost wins.
So most of the yards that in the scrap processors that I deal with, a lot of the times I'll pick up the freight and we'll use a broker, and in other cases they'll deliver them. We don't have a tremendous amount of contracted lanes because our customers are going to where the price is the highest at that time. What do you think our dealers should be expecting in the next 30 days with regard to freight rates?
So what I would say is, especially on the lanes that are going to correspond as well to very high volume shipments of retail replenishments, you are going to see your rates go up. The best advice I can give with that is increase the lead time that you offer on your spot market tenders. So for example, you're going to want to avoid same day or next day situations where it's Monday, I need the load picked up Tuesday. Anytime the spot market heats up, that is absolutely the last thing you want to be doing. So if you can move that out and give yourself, let's say, 3 days tender lead time on that. So it's Monday, I need it picked up Thursday. That's when you want to be offering the load to the broker. That's when you want to be putting it up on the load board. We found that essentially if you can minimize those same day and next day shipments, you can save yourself a lot of money. So right now, over the next 30 days, pre-planning things is very important to avoid those essentially short notice spot shipments.
Great, thank you. And what do you envision things looking like 30 days from now?
So I think once we get beyond this, I think there's almost going to be 2 cycles of retail replenishment. There was the initial run. We're going to have the next cycle should take place in about 2 weeks or so. If you look at a lot of the product, for example, on Amazon.com's website, it says it's going to be back April 8th or April 10th, somewhere in that region. People are going to then panic buy again and suck all of that up. You give it about 2 more weeks out from that, you get the 3rd cycle replenishment. At that point, I think most consumers are going to calm down. So I think that the retail replenishment cycle should be mostly finished up within about a month. That will start to be back to normal. You'll start seeing toilet paper on your Walmart shelves. I think once we get beyond that, assuming that we're still broadly, economically shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're going to start seeing a downturn in volumes. I mean, especially if we have non-essential manufacturing shut down, that is going to tremendously reduce the demand for dry van freight. Good example of that is the auto plants are shut down now for a few weeks. And so I think once we get on the other side of this, we're going to start seeing a downturn in freight, which in your industry would mean declining spot prices. So it would be an easier time to obtain capacity, and we'll see lower rates.
So as we moved, thank you very much. That's a great answer. As we moved into this COVID-19 crisis, was trucking prepared for this?
No, I don't think anybody was prepared for the spike that we've seen in demand. I mean, this truly is an unprecedented spike. It's being compounded by the fact that, especially for refrigerated goods, which is going to tie in when we're talking about overall capacity. This is also peak season for fruit and produce season. And so we've had essentially a double whammy of two spikes taking place at the same time. And some of that fruit can potentially move dry van, not as much, but we just have this massive capacity spike right now due to COVID-19, as well as the fact it's now produce season. So there's nothing that really could have prepared us for this.
Great. Well, Jason, is there anything else that you think is important that we should we should explain to scrap dealers and scrap processors and manufacturers before we wrap things up?
Nothing really, other than just recognize that we are in uncharted waters right now in the truckload sector. So, be patient with your carriers, understand rates are going to be high. This is almost assuredly going to be a temporary situation with those higher rates. And again, the biggest thing I can say now is plan ahead. Give yourself an extra 2-3 days time on those shipments, and that should hopefully, if it's contract freight, that should reduce rejection, but at least if it's spot freight, it's going to give carriers better time to plan out a route and a tour and hopefully be able to bid a little bit of a lower price.
Jason, I really want to thank you. I know that you're very busy right now, and I know that a lot of people are probably asking for your time. I very much appreciate it. I know our industry appreciates it. Would it be okay if I share your email with people, or a way for people to ask you questions? Are you okay with that, or what can I do?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to share my email. I've got if you throw my name in Google and then Michigan State, I think the first thing that pops up on that search. So I've got a web page, send me an email, hit me up through LinkedIn. Happy to chat with anybody right now.
That's great. Thank you so much.